Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving us this hour of your time. Armin and I will be hosting this webinar. Today's session is called From Dashboards to Decisions. And here's what we want you to walk out with from this session. Basically, a working blueprint for the modern CPG pricing and revenue growth management capability, and the thing that we call the Navigator. And in an honest read on where AI agents actually belong in it, not the hype version, but where they really fit. Everyone is talking about AI agents. We will show you how we're using them, and hopefully that will prompt some ideas for you as well. We're definitely not here to sell you software. We just want to walk you through how this gets built and the way we build it with our own clients and their own operators. So hopefully you find this interesting. Let's jump in. We're going to cover six basically modules in this session. The first module of the framework, as we call it, is the actual framework that ingests the data and in which the RGM decision actually live and are driven by. The second framework, where you see all the acronyms, is basically the planning loop. And that goes from the annual operating cycle to the trade management to the latest estimate and then back to the general ledger. And we'll show you how we wire it so that the forecast stops going stale by week 4, which is a typical problem that we see. The third module we'll cover is where most people get backwards. The foundation starts before the agents, and we'll explain why that order matters and what it costs when you actually skip it. And we see that happening quite often. Fourth is where AI agents earn their place. And then fifth is basically showing you in the 120 days how you can set up a structure like we do for our clients that will benefit your business. And then lastly is talking about architecture. And there's two ends of it. There is a big enterprise lakehouse versus a lean Python and BI setup. Same type of methodology, very different scale, but that will be an interesting conversation as well. So let's get into it. Armin, do you want to go through introductions?
Yes, if you haven't attended one of Revology webinars, my name is Armin Kakas, one of the partners at Revology. Predating my role as an advisor for companies, I worked in pricing and revenue management, really at the intersection of kind of pricing and data science, where if you want to use the hype term, for the last, I would say maybe 15 years, built dynamic pricing systems for retail, price optimization capabilities for CPG, led RGM teams. So again, most of my sort of adult career has been at the intersection of pricing and RGM. That's my passion. That's what I love learning about. And again, I'm a nerd out on this topic all day long when I'm not doing client engagements. So great to have you all, and hope you enjoy the next 15 minutes.
Great, thanks, Armin. My name is Enrico Sieni. For those who may not know me, I'm basically like Armin. I'm super passionate about pricing. Have been doing this for over 20 years, as many pricing practitioners just stumbled in the world of pricing and just immediately fell in love with it. So since then, I've had a chance to create multinational corporations across different industries. And then over the last roughly 3 years now, basically doing consulting and helping many more companies along the same trajectory to improve top line profitability and customer experience at the same time. So excited to be here. All right, Armin, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, great. Maybe we can just go to the next page. Most of what we talk about is from a kind of experience, both working for CPGs as well as doing projects and engagements, mostly in the upper end of mid-market. So most of our clients are in this 100 million to maybe 1 billion range, 1 or 2 billion or so. And so the problem is recurring. What we tend to see for most consumer industries, and again, even some of the larger companies, call it a billion plus, is we're trying to answer a fundamental business question, right? What is our latest forecast? How will our forecasts change if we make these different pricing and promo moves? How will our business be impacted if competition changes strategy? What is our promo ROI, et cetera, et cetera? And what we tend to see, right, is most pricing and RGM teams and maybe some of the other ancillary functions that support it, right? They have all these tools open and like 10, 15 tabs and lots of ad hoc annual analysis and answering simple questions from the head of sales or the CFO. it becomes like a day or 1 or 2 day exercise, right? And we see this even from companies that have turnkey TPX solutions otherwise, right? Still a lot of manual data stitching that's just eating everybody's time. And so there's this mix that is really imbalanced, right? We spend 90% or 95% doing manual data stitching and then 5% actually generating the insights and coming up with a strategy. Do you mind moving to the next one? And so it's a common sense statement, but it's not a data problem. Like all CPGs have plenty of data, right? It's an actual insights and a navigation problem. And I'll talk about what that means. But I think one of the fundamental things that is changing for CPGs, right? And honestly, this has been the case really for the last 10 years. This is really accelerated by AI, which is you don't actually need an expensive TPX solution, right? You don't need a $500,000 per annum license for a TPX solution that sort of promises AI and automated data ingestion from syndicated data and all these things. Because the reality is, most of the time, they're going to have to be customized, right? For most CPGs, it's going to have to be custom work. And in reality, it's going to turn into a kind of a 12-month to an 18-month engagement. What you do need, though, is you need a good TPM, right? You need a good system of record for your pricing and promotional deals, right? Trade accruals, especially if you work for a consumer company that goes through a distributor network, you'll need some tool that sends off deal information into the distributors or to another kind of intermediary system that handles that. But you need a good TPM, and a good TPM should not be expensive, right? If the TPM can actually handle driver-based forecasting, great. Otherwise, it's an optional thing. What you do need, though, is you need an integrated sort of analytics and optimization layer that you can, by the way, build in your own stack today, whether you build it in-house if you have the capacity and the know-how. Most companies have the know-how, they don't have the capacity. Or you insource it through resources like us. It's actually very trivial nowadays to build it. I use the word trivial carefully, right? Because it's actually a lot of complex work, but all your data is there. And agentic AI has actually compressed, not necessarily the timeline, but certainly compressed the cost of doing this for companies as a one-time effort versus annual high fees that they spend, right? And so I think this is a really important thing to remember is I think AI is accelerating all this, and it's really positioning even a lot of these mid-market companies with these capabilities they can build themselves to do these integrated insights and pricing and promotion analytics and optimization efforts, et cetera, et cetera. Let's move on to the next one. Yeah. And so again, what we tend to see is companies have a really tough time even just getting driver-based forecast. And again, not some of the larger CPGs perhaps, but a lot of them in the market. It just turns into a bunch of different Excel spreadsheets that salespeople manage, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we tend to propose is this integrated environment where you have your syndicated data coming in, data from your planning tool, right? Maybe data from your pricing and promotional tool or your TPM, your ERP data's coming in. If you go through distributors, which most food and beverage companies do, your distributor data is coming through the typical system. There's a VIP, that's what most people use, right? And so you actually ingest all this data using common keys, using a sort of a mini master data management platform that we will talk about, right? And it doesn't have to be expensive. It's fairly simple, but there's a way to assemble all this data, applying business logic and methodology that enables you to build the views in the dashboard that lets you make decisions 50, 100 times faster than you typically can through ad hoc ways. And by the way, once you have the clean integrated data, it also sets your company up really well for agentic AI, right? Many companies talk about AI nowadays, and there's specific use cases that we can use AI nowadays, and we'll talk about that. But having this capability and doing that in-house, again, in-house or in-sourced, really sets your company up well for doing AI because you need the foundations ready before you actually do AI. We can move on to the next one.
Yeah, one question, Armin, that the audience may have. We refer to Microsoft Fabric here. Is this a must-have?
No, it's really most companies really we were trying to illustrate is it's some online data warehouse, data lake, data stack. Most companies Most clients that we deal with are on the Microsoft stack, and so they tend to either use Azure in the past or are slowly migrating to Fabric. And so it's not necessarily needed. If you're a smaller company, and we'll talk about that, if you're, let's say, maybe up to 75 million, maybe up to 100 million, you can build these capabilities using just a Python script that somebody runs, right? As long as all your data lands in a SharePoint, a script can pick it up and go through all the data transformations and engineering. Or if you're a larger company, you do need a proper data lake and a data pipeline. But Microsoft Fabric tends to be the most popular one for most mid-market clients that we deal with.
Yeah, that's great. If anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A section or send us a direct message. Feel free.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the other piece that we tend to see is, again, we do this annual research, sometimes annual, sometimes every other year. It's called the Revenue Growth Analytics Maturity Scorecard, where we evaluate companies' maturity scores along pricing, analytics, strategy, promotion optimization, et cetera. What we tend to find is companies that have actually built internal in-house pricing, analytics, and optimization capabilities, whether it's sophisticated Excel or especially like a Power BI type capability or like a web app capability, those companies have higher maturity scores than companies that use these quote unquote turnkey solutions. And there's a reason for that, right? And the reason is those companies are just a lot more bought into this idea that pricing is a key strategic enabler for their company. And so what we tend to hear a lot of the times is we just need a pricing optimization software, or we need a promo optimization software, or we need AI. And we hear this in CPG, we hear this in other industries as well, right? We just need some silver bullet. And the truth is you don't, right? You actually have to solve the foundations and ideally build the analytics capabilities in-house so your team owns it. And ideally your team is part of creating that because it just generates a lot more buy-in, a lot more kind of last mile adoption of the actual solutions. And not only that, but most new platforms that sort of companies get, you just keep adding to your tech stack, number one. Number two, there's a kind of a big problem when you look at the numbers and you try to reconcile that against, let's say, what finance is reporting. And I see this all the time in companies, right? The sales team is reporting on profitability for customers, or the pricing team, and finance is a totally different number because they use different logic, different allocation methods, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to solve the foundations first. And the one thing that most turnkey solutions, and again, this is not kind of me belittling turnkey solutions, although somewhat I am because I was on the receiving end of this when I worked in CPG, right? It doesn't solve the issue of sort of common definitions across all stakeholder entities, right? It doesn't actually integrate easily what you already use, right? And I think most importantly, it doesn't solve the integrated sort of data quality issue that many companies deal with. And by the way, that is necessary for AI enablement, right? We hear this, and again, this is not just consumer, this is like Enrico hears this all the time when we talk to distributors and manufacturers, right? Many boards are convincing EOs that they need to jump on the AI bandwagon for productivity, efficiency reasons, et cetera, right? Or maybe some senior executive is playing with Claude and they have a magical moment and they're like, oh, we need this and it's going to change the trajectory of our company. And it's like, you need to first pause and figure out and evaluate if the data foundations are in the right place for your company. Not just for pricing and RGM related stuff, but also for supply chain, right? Which is supply chain inventory related things that are really important for S&OP type optimizations, right? So I'd say that's an incredibly important element. Let me move on quickly, just out of time. We'll talk about the foundation. So let's maybe go to the next one, if you will, right? Again, incredibly important to have one sets of definitions, right? Again, like how do we define basis versus incremental? Some companies like to use their own kind of modeled incremental volume, or some vendors do that, right? Others, which I actually prefer, just trust the volumetric data that comes through syndicated data, right? List versus net, working versus not working trade. What is the right allocation of selling expenses? How do we evaluate adjusted gross profit, right? Like we need to have one set of definitions that flow through our data pipeline that everybody agrees to. Number two, we need to have some master data management, right? We have this Revology flow, which is a very kind of simplistic metadata management capability that I'll flash up that puts the ownership of the, let's say, customer hierarchy, product hierarchy, cross systems, right? ERP versus syndicated versus, let's say, a distributor platform like VIP, but it puts the management of that in the hands of the business user. Same thing with GL allocation, right? Many companies struggle with this, right? They have, especially heavy, I would say heavy DSD, food and beverage companies where let's say 50, 60, 70% of the volume is going through DSD, right? They have costs for the direct customers or the first receivers. Most of those cases are distributors. Sometimes they have costs that are not actually allocated to those direct customers, right? So there needs to be a common kind of methodology that everybody agrees to, dictated by finance, of how these costs are going to be allocated to direct customers, number one, down to the product, to UPC or PPG level, and then number two, down to the indirect retailer level, right? And that's incredibly important because then you can actually understand what is the profitability of your indirect retailers relative to their size, and now you can make different decisions that otherwise you would not have been able to make. We can move to the next one. Let's maybe skip through this one because I've talked about this, and we'll just send it out so you guys will have it, just in the interest of the time. So again, I cannot emphasize it enough. Like, you need to have some kind of master data management. It doesn't have to be master data in the kind of classical sense of deploying $1.5 million master data management solution that takes 2 years. You just need some web app that is, again, with AI, it's very trivial to deploy nowadays, that lets you manage products, customers, again, GL allocations, calendars. Maybe you need to manage different retailer calendars because their ad breaks are at different times versus your syndicated data, right? But you need a common platform that does that. And again, you can build this. You can even build this using some of the Microsoft tools, or you can just build a web app using, let's say, JavaScript or some other language, right? But it's relatively simple to build. But this should be at the center of your pricing and RGM Analytics Navigator capability, right? Because this actually determines how that data integration happens, how the GL allocation happens, and it actually notifies key business users if a new UPC appears or a new cost center needs to be mapped, et cetera, et cetera. We can move on to the next one. So maybe I'll finish it off before I pass it on to Enrico. What we typically do is we have this kind of tiered allocation methodology, or this waterfall allocation, where we allocate it to direct customers. Again, if it's directly allocated, it's easy. A lot of the times it's not allocated to the product level. In that case, we do volume-based allocation for those, right? We then do a distributor-based allocation to indirect customers, and we typically do that either based on syndicated data. We know which retailers are being supplied by which distributors, and we know what the sell-out units are, so we do sell-out unit-based allocation, or sometimes we can also do that based on a distributor sell-through based allocation, again, using systems like VIP, right? And then anything that's kind of residual, we do a residual-based allocation. But this way, we have a very clear, traceable allocation methodology of your GLs, where now you can actually measure end customer profitability versus just your direct customer profitability. This is just a different view of what I've shown earlier. This is how most, and it's a bit too techy for those of you that are not so fond of IT, but typically what ends up happening is you build these systems, right? And let's stick with the Fabric example, which most companies are now anyways migrating to, right? Is you bring in all these source systems that I talked about, right? Your syndicated data from Circana, Nielsen, whatever, ERP data, et cetera. It lands into a bronze environment. It's your raw data, we call it bronze environment, right? Then the data gets cleaned, it gets deduplicated, et cetera, right? That's your silver environment. And the gold environment is where the magic happens, right? That's where you actually build a semantic model. That's where you build the tables based on the integrated data. That's where you build promo effectiveness tables that already essentially integrates your promo plans that are in your TPM tool with COGS that may come from ERP, with the actual incremental units from the syndicated data, so you can capture incremental gross profits, so you can actually capture ROIs, et cetera, et cetera. That happens in the gold environment. You get it visualized in Power BI or Tableau or whatever your visualization tool of choice is. It could be even Excel, right? And then now, if you really want to build agentic AI, whether it's conversational analytics or true kind of agentic optimization, whatever that is, you apply that on the gold environment that, by the way, now also has to be architectured in a way that conforms to kind of how agents interpret data and fields and metrics, et cetera, right? And again, the thing that I will emphasize, those of you that are in IT, you will probably love me for this, is that the maintenance of this master data management or Revology flow, whatever we're going to call that, it needs to come out from IT. This should not be maintained by IT. It needs to be put in the hands of the business user and the stakeholder that are managing the day-to-day for that, right? Whether it's in pricing or finance or marketing or whoever, right? Or operations, but it needs to be put in the hands of the business user. That's what creates a sense of ownership for these capabilities, okay? And then, yeah, just to recap is it's really foundational capability, right? That not only enables these integrated pricing analytics and optimization capabilities, which Enrico will show you through some kind of basic mock-ups that we created of existing work and deployments that we've done, but it also sets you up for the foundation of agentic AI and other analytics and optimization capabilities, i.e. for S&OP, inventory optimization, et cetera, okay? All right, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thanks, Armin. That was great. So let's talk about the Navigator and go in detail. So we have 6 modules in the Navigator. They all answer different commercial questions, but they all reconcile back to the same general ledger truth. And that's what makes them a system instead of 6 disconnected type of reports. Here's the full picture. There's 6 modules, 1 foundation in the middle. There's customer profitability, which is the customer P&L and the margin walk to the general ledger. You have assortment analytics for your distribution coverage, velocity, hidden gems. You have promotion effectiveness for the baseline lift and incremental ROI. And then you have the pricing scenario planning for elasticity scenarios and your price pack impacts. And obviously the consumption and shopper demand, which looks at repeat, switching, and buyer cohorts. We'll go through all of these, including the weekly performance monitor. And each of these eats at a different slice of the data and drives a different decision. But it's important that every one of them ties back to the same reconcile core so that you do have a cohesive decision-making process instead of people looking at specific slices and making decisions in a vacuum, which may be detrimental for the broader organization. So let's walk through each of the modules one by one. The first module is the PVCM decomposition. We call it the heartbeat, the read on what moved, what broken down, and what is in the right grain. What it does, it bridges the net revenue and contribution margin, period over period, or your actual versus plan, split into your price, volume, cost, and mix effects. And the way it does it is an account by product group, by month grain, which of course you can filter on the fly by retailer, channel, segment, and brand. Here's the operator read. If you pair this with a proper base versus incremental decomposition, and the fight over those numbers basically just goes away, right? So one of the issues that we find today is that you have up of 3 different teams in organization producing 3 different numbers. And all of a sudden, no one knows what is the truth, right? What is the right number? Some people filter it by certain factors. Some people are looking at different time frames. Some people include or exclude certain promos. And all of a sudden, you just have a mess in terms of people being convinced as to whether a promotion was truly effective or not. It's because everyone is looking at it from different angles and different points of view. And so once you start looking at it at this cohesive level, all of a sudden, every delta is accounted for, and you have one picture of the truth that you can reconcile across the entire organization. This is an example, and of course, these are all customer data which has been sanitized for obviously confidential reasons. But we're giving an example of a company called Hydroco, and this is an example of what a customer P&L detailed view could look like for a beverage company. And so you have your net revenue, your contribution margin, and it's all walked down to the account by product group level, fully reconciled to the general ledger. And you can see your gross sales, your trade spends, returns, walk down to net revenue, cost of goods, freight, marketing, and so on. The bottom line is one number for sales, finance, brand, reconciled to the general ledger so that nobody is arguing about whose total is right anymore. The second module is around the promo lift and the return on investment. And this is a post-event module. So what worked in that promotion reconciled back to the trade management key. It gives you the incremental volume, the incremental profit, your ROI at the event level, not at the period level, so that you can sort and pull up what were the best 10 and worst 10 events and drill down to individual items, and again, reconcile it all the way back to that trade promotional key. And here's the part that most platforms skip, that reconciliation to the promotional key. Because without it, your post-event and your next event planning live in two different systems. And so the learning loop breaks. It's why across the industry, more than half of promotions don't return what people think they do, is that nobody ever closes the loop between those two. If you look at it in practice, this is what one of the visuals we created looks like. The event level decomposition is on the left, and the promotional calendar reconciled to the trade keys on the right-hand side. Of course, each company likes to see these in slightly different ways, but this is a pretty effective way of taking a single event apart. You take your gross sales, your promo spend, incremental margin, ROI, and even the cannibalization percentage, and then see the whole calendar across retailers with conflict risk events flagged for visibility. And the payoff is trade ROI that you read in real time, not 3 months after the fact, which means that the next buyer conversation is shaped by the last one, instead of finding out a quarter later that a flagship event quietly lost you money. So it really allows the organization to be much better prepared and to have visibility as to what's working and what is not. Module 3 is about distribution and velocity, so the early warning layer. It catches distribution gaps before the category review and not after. And so what you see here is ACV weighted distribution gap analysis and velocity benchmarking against the category. So you can see hidden gem detection for low distribution, high velocity SKUs, and it flags the tail SKU rationalization candidates. And here's the mistake that we see most often with this analysis. A team may watch velocity decline and calls it a pricing problem when it's really a distribution loss. And those need completely different fixes. So this module separates the two in seconds. And you can see on the quadrant, what are your workhorses, your hidden gems, your tail candidates, and distribution gaps. And of course, you can filter these to your own desire so that you can look at different parts of the organization and different type of products and retailers. In practice, the portfolio health matrix on the left-hand side, a customer example, and then the geographic distribution gaps with ranked expansion ask on the right-hand side. And you can see the whole portfolio sorted into your usual categories as before, your workhorses, hidden gems, underperformers, at risk, and with the revenue at risk and the hidden gem opportunity quantified. And then, of course, you can start drilling down into which geographies are sitting below the benchmark for any given pack. So this allows you for the first time to look at things from a broad level and start setting up some thresholds that you want the system to start showing you when performance goes below those thresholds. And that's what we're seeing very often failing in organizations where there is a constant whack-a-mole, rather than having an organized approach where you actually have thresholds that highlight things that need attention instead of having to analyze the whole thing and keep on running around in circles. Module 4 is the scenario analysis. So this is the pre-event module. This is where you turn a buyer room hypothesis into an answer that you can defend. And the way you can defend it is if you have data and you've proven, and typically that comes with elasticity modeling. So you can own your promo elasticity, your merchandising lift factors, and your cross elasticity for the cannibalization that you expect to have. All of this is fed into a new base price, a new promo depth. You can display and feature toggles, and it lays out the scenario out side by side. So now you can start visualizing what are your expected range of performance outputs. And it uses elasticity behind the scenes. I won't go through the technical details. I know that Armin could spend the day just on that. But the idea is that where the data is sparse, which is often what we see with some, especially smaller companies, the model backs off gracefully instead of handing you a nonsense of elasticity. And so now all of a sudden you can actually have a number that you can defend across the table from a buyer instead of something that is generated by a system and may not have enough meat to substantiate that output. And this is the typical example with AI has hallucinating, right? You don't want to be backed in a corner where you have data that you cannot defend. In practice, there's three screens that we set up. You have side-by-side comparisons, you have recommended plan, and all of it is elasticity baked. And so you set up your scenario, your baseline units, your promo units, the depth for discounting, your expected lift and cannibalization. And then you can start comparing your scenarios and doing what if to understand what is your best return on investment based on incremental units against the lowest investment that you can implement. And then you basically land on a recommended plan with the trade ask already sized and the payoff being as part of your hypothesis that you can test. And of course, the more data you have, the stronger your hypothesis and your recommendations become over time. Module 6 is really around the weekly monitoring and opportunity gap, right? And so this is what we call the Silk Road to success. And it basically now starts benchmarking your competition and starts showing you the distribution and velocity gaps on a weekly basis. And that's really one important factor is you don't want this to be a one-off or a quarterback that you run once a quarter. It's really becoming part of your operational process where on a weekly basis, you're setting thresholds, you're understanding areas of opportunity or areas where you need to react to. And now all of a sudden, as you see on the top and right-hand side, it will start flashing red to say, hey, an action is required here. You need to pay attention to that. Very important to you pull it all together in those areas. Module 5 is about the consumption deep dive. And this is really understanding what is happening with your customer over time and understanding if there are any pattern changes over time in terms of switching behaviors or changes in penetration. And of course, hopefully, marketing is playing a role in hand versus you being subject to someone else's more effective marketing tasks. But again, it's one way of visualizing these patterns and being able to catch early on when something is going the wrong way. And so in summary, you have these 6 different modules that come together, and it's really important that the Navigator is a method, right? The technology stack is a choice you make based on your data volume, your team maturities, and your channel complexity. But independent of which type of technical capabilities and tech stack that you have, as Armin mentioned earlier, the goal here is to really come up with a 6-pronged approach that works in a cohesive manner and allows you to take data that is all reconciled across organization and that then you can put in on a weekly cycle so that you can drive better decision making. Okay. All right, Armin, I'll pass it back on to you.
Great. Yeah, maybe we can move on to the next slide.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I wanted to just maybe illustrate is depending on the company size, you don't need the same type of solution. The methodology is going to be the same. So the underlying elasticity models, data integration methodology, GL allocation, et cetera, is going to be the same. But you may not need the full automated data pipelines and the mini data master management, web app, et cetera, right? So typically, when we have these types of deployments for companies, you may deploy this for a $1 billion, call it enterprise scale consumer products company that will actually have the full system, as we've shown before with Microsoft Fabric, the underlying foundational piece, with readiness for agentic AI. Or you may have a smaller kind of mid-market firm, right? Let's say $75 to $200 million. This solution could be very well run by scripts that either somebody runs every week, right? They just upload the right data extracts into a central SharePoint and either manually started or automated scripts grab that and run through the analytical process. And typically that can be as little as 5 to 10 minutes or maybe upwards of 20 minutes if the elasticity models and the promo lift models need to be refreshed, right? But the point is, depending on your scale, the same methodology applies, but the actual implementation and the execution can differ, right? Maybe we can move on to the next one. I think it just ties in, but this is to illustrate. If you can go to the next slide, Enrico. This is illustrating what does it typically get companies, right? And if you look at those scores, those are the blended revenue growth analytics maturity scores. Again, think of this as like how mature is a company around revenue growth management and the necessary kind of analytics and data infrastructure that they have. And so again, annual survey, typically we have between 150, 200 respondents that participate. But low maturity would look like a very manual analysis, random Excel sheets, lots of cost plus approach, right? That's about 4% of the companies. Medium would be, okay, we have some kind of standardized definitions in the way we evaluate things, and we have pricing KPIs, et cetera, et cetera. But again, still lots of random Excel sheets, and there's not a systematic approach of how we do things. If we have to integrate data between internal and external systems, we still do that manually, and it's somebody's job to do that over the course of several days and weeks, right? That's about half the companies. Another 40% of companies have, again, they have some tools, whether it's Tableau, Power BI, they have LCC models, whether they refresh it once a year or every 2 or 3 years, right? But they have some kind of predictive analytics in place. Companies that actually have these predictive analytics capabilities in place, it's typically going to be anywhere between a 3 to 5% margin lift versus the low companies, right? So if analytics and revenue management is just in total disarray and it's just everything is a turnkey solution in that sense via Excel versus if you actually have some systematic integrated analytics driven solutions with predictive capabilities, again, 3 to 5% margin lift. That's typically what we see, upwards of maybe 10 to 15% in trade efficiency or trade ROI. And the very high would be companies that are actually, they may not be doing agentic AI workflows, but they certainly have the data foundations ready to apply agentic AI on top, right? And that's a very few companies. It's about 2%. So it's a very kind of you see this very extreme kind of distribution on the low end and the very high end in terms of kind of comprehensive revenue growth analytics maturity scores. But I would say the capability we're talking here will land a company in between this high to very high segment, at least in terms of their analytics and optimization capabilities related to pricing and promotions, right? Again, on the next slide, I talked about this. Maybe it's more of a lead behind for you. So again, if you're larger company kind of towards on the larger side of mid-market CPG, you have multi-million-dollar trade investment, right? My recommendation is to actually have a systematic capability where you have automated data pipelines, where you have data that is automatically tapping into any API capabilities that your source systems have, pulls down retailer platform data, right? So Walmart, Centella, or Kroger, or whoever has retailer-specific platforms, those are all happening on a scheduled/automated manner. Or if you're a smaller enterprise, you can still build these capabilities, but it's going to be largely a Python or code-based driven, okay? Let's talk about agentic AI, and maybe, Enrico, we can skip to slide 39, so the next one. Yeah, again, what we tend to see is majority of the time we're assembling the data, we're doing the data stitching, and very little of the time we're actually acting on it. And we want to flip it around, right? And it's been the case in traditional CPG, honestly, for as long as I remember. And more companies are realizing that by insourcing these capabilities, they can flip this axis around and spend more time generating the insights and acting on the insights. If we go to the next one, a high level kind of visual of what agentic AI can do, right? Would look something like this. Again, once you have the data foundations in place, another piece that I would recommend is, again, you want to architect your data and architect your tables in a way that is easy for AI to ingest, right? Although those requirements are honestly getting more and more lax as the capabilities of AI improves. But the other piece that I would recommend is beyond just your data, right? Actually create kind of a knowledge base of prior context. And when I say context, it could be transcripts of key internal conversations you've had on pricing and promo results, right? It could be presentations and decks and prior analyses of some client-facing scenario analysis or some client-facing deck, right? You want to be able to ingest that context and actually create some highly structured knowledge base that almost serves as like a dictionary or some very easily queryable knowledge base that gives the agent and gives the AI additional context about not just about your business and your competition, but also about pricing and revenue management scenarios and thought processes specifically. But if you think about what you can use AI agents for within the context of pricing and RGM, you could have an agent that does the price, volume, cost mix analysis, right? And actually sends you out recommendations of what you need to act on, let's say every month or every quarter, right? You can have an agent that does promo optimization, right? Trade investment planning. You can have an agent that does assortment optimization, and then you can have one that does price spec architecture, right? Overarching on top of all this would be like a pricing and RGM orchestration agent, right? That understands what needs to be done and then calls the right agent to then act upon that, right? To actually digest all of your data, digest the context, figure out what the issue is, uncover opportunities, make recommendations, right? But it's incredibly important to architect it the right way. And it's also really important to apply guardrails when you build these solutions, right? So you don't end up with a bunch of hallucinations that produce nonsense, right? We can go to the next one. I'll flip through these. I'll try to flip through these fast so Enrico can close us out. So we talked about let's say the mix management or the price volume cost mix agent. Again, this could be something that automatically does its stuff every month, right? Every week is an overkill, but every month it would send out a report that tells sales and finance what they need to pay attention to, why is gross profit down, what is it driven by, what you need to do about it, and run some scenarios, right? If you were to increase, I'm making this up, if you were to increase the distributor allowance here would impact mix and profitability this way, and therefore that's our recommendation, right? Similar with the promo optimization agent, right? This could be something, and we're just brainstorming on the various ideas, but this could be something that automatically looks at the plans that you have for the various retailers. It runs scenarios on alternative plans. It automatically produces a report or a PowerPoint deck that you can take to the retailer that tells you about the break even that's required for whatever the retailer is asking. It also maybe recommends alternative dates for future promotions and automatically runs the scenario analysis and the profit impact on it, right? It's whatever you want to design around the promo optimization agent, right? It can deliver that for you in the format that is the most helpful, right? Whether it's an Excel workbook or whether it's an upload into your trade promo management system, although I would be against it at this point of kind of AI maturity. Or it could be a deck that gets delivered to the buyer, right? Because AI can nowadays actually build some very comprehensive decks. Trade investment planning agent on the next one, right? This could be as complicated, or not complicated, but this could be as relevant as creating optimized promo calendars, right? Or it could be looking at your existing pricing and promo plans in your TPM and recommending how you need to shift or reallocate your promotional investments to make up for some margin or net revenue shortfall that you have, let's say in the latest quarter, right? That could be something the agent does, right? And now on the assortment side, this is where it could be an agent that tells you, hey, you have an opportunity to rationalize your portfolio in this retailer because you're low velocity and you're low distribution. And anyways, none of the promotions have worked. And so why are you even spending money here? In the next reset, you need to just remove this thing and put your money elsewhere where you have really high velocities relative to the category, but you're under distributed. Oh, and by the way, promotions work really well in this account. But something that would just do the work of an analyst and it would do it automatically on a schedule in a more comprehensive manner, right? That you can review. On the next one, you can have an agent for price back architecture, right? And yeah, again, like that could actually look at several things. You could look at existing price back curves. You could look at the price back curves of the competition. It could look for channel conflicts, right? So it could look for those anomalies and recommend specific ways to adjust your pricing to optimize your price back curve to either make more money, more volume, or to avoid channel conflict, right? And again, the piece that is sitting on top of all this would be like a pricing and RGM orchestration agent, right? So if you give it a task. It's no different than creating a skill. And we tend to use Claude. So we're actually Claude enterprise customers ourselves. And so we have like master orchestration skills where if we give it a task, it would know which skills and which agents to invoke for that particular ask. So in similar manner, you would have a pricing and RGM orchestration agent. If you ask a question or give it a task, hey, I want to understand what my promo ROI was, what it is year to date. Tell me the biggest accounts and PPGs that are dragging promo ROI down. Tell me why that is. And by the way, what can I do about it? Run some scenarios that I can present to my sales leadership and create a deck that's easily digestible by my colleagues, right? And it would know which agents to evoke, which data tables to look for. Oh, and by the way, it has the context from prior work that your humans have done before, right? Through painstaking effort and manual data stitching and whatever else. And it would actually apply that knowledge to create something that is now, even if it's not 100% done or complete, it is, let's say, 90% done, and you're now spending just exponentially less time on doing this work. Okay, so I'll gloss over this, but just simply illustrating which agents are in production versus early pilot versus design. I would say most companies that build these pricing and RGM Navigator analytics capabilities in-house on a well-structured data platform, Microsoft Fabric, are good candidates to essentially build these agentic AI capabilities. And start with the simplest ones, right? Like the price volume mix and maybe assortment analytics, and then move on to promo optimization before you get into something more complicated. Okay. All right. I'll pass it back to Enrico.
That's great. Thank you. We're going to wrap it up. So 3 things to cover next. The first is the RGA maturity scorecard. We'll talk about a 120-day plan and how to start it. So we'll make it concrete. So the first is on the scorecard. As Armin mentioned, the scorecard really answers one question. Where does your organization sit today across the 4 capability areas, and what's realistic to build next? Right, so there are 4 areas, each are scored on their own, and then they roll up into one of 4 tiers. And it takes a commercial leader about 15 minutes to self-assess. So it's a great tool that we recommend all pricing stakeholders and even commercial stakeholders to take. And we've benchmarked over 250 organizations in 2025 across different industries, of which 158 were just in manufacturing, retail, CPG, tech, and distribution. So over the years, we've collected a wealth of information in terms of where companies are at. And what we would like to have as a call for action is for you to look at your own organization across 4 main areas. What is on pricing and analytics and optimization. So this includes the measurements, the tools around elasticity, modeling, price waterfall, and so on. What we found is that about 60% ranked as high in 2025. And as you go through each of these different areas, that some areas are basically struggling in terms of getting traction. The promotion effectiveness and optimization on the top right is one area where we see companies stalled at medium. And of course, we covered that in quite some depth today. But this is one area where companies tend to have autopilot going on in those areas, and is definitely an opportunity. On the sales and marketing enablement area, the majority of companies are below high maturity levels. So again, getting that traction and understanding customer behavior and being able to be proactive about it is still an area where companies are struggling with, and there's a lot of reactive behavior around that. So definitely an opportunity. And then also on pricing and profitability strategy, there's still a tremendous amount of cost plus behavior going on across many industries. And of course, that's an opportunity for improvement as well, because they're not really pricing and selling on value, which means that they're leaving money on the table. The 4 main tiers, these are the ones that Armin mentioned before. As you get the output from the assessment, it will guide you through and tell you where your organization stands compared to the rest. So I won't spend too much time on that. And this is the 120-day, laying it out as a timeline based on what Armin and I were explaining earlier in terms of the different modules and how long we believe it takes to actually bring these to completion and to implementation. So it's definitely something that it doesn't take 6 months or a year. It can be done very easily. Again, you need to have a clear plan of implementation and have the right stakeholders bought in, but this is very feasible, and we've done this with other clients. So it's very presumable that if you have a strong pricing team and stakeholders, you can accomplish this as well with or without our help. And the idea is, if you go through the Navigator capability that we explained, you basically have the 6 modules that we covered today in the session. And so that includes your data, which is trusted by everyone, including your weekly routine in place. And the good thing is that you own it, right? This is on your own servers, it is your own capability, is not something that you bought from the outside that is a black box. So very important, I think, at this stage that the tools are available and you're able to create your own stack and create and model the system the way you best need it within your organization instead of a third-party tool that is implemented on that. I see Brandon has his hand up. If you don't mind, Brandon, sending us a Q&A, that's probably the best way to tackle your question as we do that. One call for action that we will ask you is, this is the link on the right-hand side, the QR code at the bottom, the actual link. Please go in and take the scorecard survey yourself. Again, it's 15 minutes. It just gives you a way of confidentially putting in your information that only you see. And obviously, it's tagged against our own database, and it will tell you how you stand based on your responses against what we see other organizations across different industries faring in terms of these different categories.
Yeah, and by the way, I see Brandon's question in the chat. Yeah, there's the actual revenue growth analytics maturity assessment, Brandon. It is just a scorecard. So think of that as just an online survey that asks questions across different categories and then scores you based on best in class, and then makes some recommendations, although those recommendations are more generic to each of the capabilities and less specific to your particular industry or your particular company. But it's just a scorecard. It's absolutely free. You can take it probably while you're enjoying some wine.
Great question. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah. And so we'll send the deck out. Armin, do you want to talk about the white paper as well?
Yeah, so we actually have it's probably more like an ebook, but we have a detailed white paper that we're finalizing today and tomorrow. Each of you will receive a copy of that. Feel free to share it around, but we actually go deeper into how to build these capabilities in your companies, including data sources, allocation methodologies, elasticity model approaches, promo effectiveness methods, technical considerations, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll be sending that out as a follow-up along with the webinar content. But again, look for that white paper. I think it's actually going to be really useful for you guys. And if any of you want to get in touch with us, please do. So you have our emails. You can contact us on our website, and we're more than happy to engage. Again, my kind of personal point of view is companies that have these capabilities built in-house with their data just have a greater pricing and revenue growth management maturity than others that rely on kind of turnkey third-party black box solutions, and it's also reflected in their P&L. So guys, thank you so much for spending our time with us and joining Enrico and myself. We will follow up with the content by tomorrow or no later than Monday. And as always, reach out to us with any questions or any observations that you have.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Good seeing you. Bye.
Thank you.